Good afternoon and welcome. I'm so glad you're with us today. Today is an exceptional day here at the Western Diocese. For the last several days, we've had the good fortune of viewing an exhibit prepared for us by Dr. Rouben Adalian, our guest here on the show today. Dr. Adalian is the director of the Armenian National Institute, and his latest project about the Armenian Church during the time of genocide is what we had an opportunity to view at the Zorayan Museum. Let me introduce you. Dr. Adalian holds a PhD in history from the University of California here in Los Angeles. He is a specialist on the Caucasus and the Middle East. And it gives me great pleasure to welcome you and thank you for joining us. I want to start off. This is an incredible exhibit that was very enlightening. It is inspirational. What prompted you to do this exhibit or bring the Armenian Church 1915 to us?
Well, thank you. It's a two-part answer to your question. I wanted to address the matter and the role of the Armenian Church during the Armenian genocide. There's a popular conception that the genocide occurred in the Ottoman Empire, and the mass of the Armenian people were deported from historic Armenia and Anatolia into the Syrian desert. But there is another portion to this story, which is what happened in eastern Armenia and what happened at ETCHMIADZIN. The Church played, it turns out, as the evidence shows, a major role in rescuing the Armenian people, in reaching and delivering aid to the refugees, because a portion of the Armenian population in the Ottoman Empire was able to escape across the border into Russia, into eastern Armenia at the time. And as it also happens, there were a number of very significant church leaders who played a critical role in this during the course of the Armenian genocide, and the exhibit highlights that role, especially the role of the Catholicos Georg V Surenyans, who turned out to be a man of tremendous courage, a man of great leadership traits, and therein made a very, very significant difference during the course of the Armenian genocide. He was a man of truly world caliber significance, and we hope that through this exhibit he will receive the proper credit that he so deserves. The other part of it had to do with during the course of research at the National Archives in Washington, I uncovered a set of photographs that required a lot of exploration, and over the course of the years of examining them and studying them and reading the supportive literature, it began to dawn on me that these photographs are actually documenting what happened to the Armenian people during the genocide, but at a very specific location, and this was ETCHMIADZIN itself. A substantial number of photographs, it turns out, were taken during the course of the genocide as the Armenian refugees were arriving at ETCHMIADZIN, and as the Catholic state responded immediately and organized aid and other forms of assistance to relieve the plight of the refugees. So the exhibit strives to achieve those both ends.
And it does quite successfully, because we always think of the Armenian Church during the genocide as the experience in Western Armenia, and certainly we see the ruins there today, evidence of what happened. We don't think of what was going on in ETCHMIADZIN around the other side of Ararat.
Right.
Yeah.
Quite right. The destruction of the Armenian Church in the Ottoman Empire is well known, because the evidence is so glaring and disturbing. But nevertheless, the genocide spilled over into eastern Armenia. It spilled over right to the very walls of ETCHMIADZIN. And so the effects of the genocide were not confined to the borders of the Ottoman Empire. They impacted the population of eastern Armenia as well, certainly with the arrival of the refugees and the response of the Armenian people in the Transcaucasus in doing the best they could to help the refugees who were arriving. And mind you, we're talking 100,000, maybe 200,000 people arriving within a matter of days and weeks, who needed every form of support, medical attention, food, shelter, clothing, every form of assistance that one could imagine.
So that's very interesting because, and I think that's what came out as a surprise for many of us, because we're all familiar with what happened in Western Armenia, and certainly the destroyed churches that we see today. But what your research has shown, what this exhibit shows, is that ETCHMIADZIN was impacted physically, emotionally, spiritually. Can you talk a little bit about ETCHMIADZIN 1915, and in particular the Catholicos, Kevork V?
It turns out that Catholicos Kevork V Surenians was a man of tremendous strength and tremendous character, and under the most trying circumstances, he revealed himself to be one of the most outstanding church leaders that the Armenian people has produced. Here he was a witness to the destruction and ruin of our historic Armenia, and here's the father of the Armenian people, the religious father of the Armenian people, a whole legacy of 1,000 and more years of religious leadership in ETCHMIADZIN, and he was watching and seeing for himself as the Armenian refugees began to flood into eastern Armenia, and all of them thinking of nowhere else to go but to ETCHMIADZIN, the one place they knew that'd be safe and receive within the arms of the church. But the church was, and ETCHMIADZIN in specific, was not an institution where you could house 100,000 refugees overnight. And yet the Holy Father acted immediately and galvanized his entire congregation there, and all of the churchmen were engaged in literally refugee work in every shape or form that they could participate in. And so ETCHMIADZIN became a refugee camp. We don't think of this holy site, of this pilgrimage site at the center of the Armenian church as a refugee camp, but it literally became that. And it was a terrible site, very reminiscent of the real concentration camps and even the death camps in the Syrian desert. It's difficult to imagine that this remarkable site was transformed overnight into such a horrible scene. Here, tens of thousands, as I say, arriving and immediately facing a crisis of how to feed, how to house, how to shelter all of these people. And of course, the spread of epidemics quickly, then in the very sight of the walls of ETCHMIADZIN, thousands falling and dying. This is not a story that we know very well, and it's not a story that's appreciated, and I think it puts a new light on ETCHMIADZIN and what a critical role and what an important place it really became, even more so in 1915.
So in 1915, ETCHMIADZIN there, Yerevan down the street, so to speak. Was Yerevan, how was it?
We have to think back 100 years. Yerevan was a small, dusty town, as they say, with hardly a paved road. It was not the capital of Armenia. In fact, the largest city in Russian Armenia, in eastern Armenia, was Gyumri, or Alexandropol, as it was called at the time. But in the minds of the Western Armenian people, the country folks, the people of Van and Erzurum, who were the part of the population that had a chance to flee across the Turkish border into Russian Armenia, for them there was only one place they knew, the one place that they could direct themselves as a location that they could identify on the map. And so the flow of refugees went towards ETCHMIADZIN, to the, as I say, the protective institution of the Armenian people as they knew it.
In your exhibit, you talk about the early warning and His Holiness being really that instrument of early warning. Can you talk a little bit about that? That's a relatively new concept,
right.
Early warning to genocide. We don't think about that. Is it possible?
You know, in, say, past 10, 20 years, as genocide continues to be repeated across the world, scholars who study human rights, who study genocide, and who are focused on prevention of genocide, have developed this concept that if an early warning is issued, that there is a better chance of preventing, arresting, putting a stop to genocide, or even interfering and impeding the outbreak of genocide. And as we look into history, we realize the evidence, the record shows that the first man who issued an early warning was Catholicos Kevork V Surenian himself. He used every power of his office as the leader of the Armenian people to appeal through every diplomatic channel that was open to him. And mind you, this is during World War I, to reach world leaders and to alert them, to tell them what was happening to the Armenian people. He did not stay silent. He became truly a national leader, more and more than just the head of the church. What is critical, and I realize, you know, the warning itself did not necessarily result in any alteration of the situation for the Armenians, but nevertheless something emerged, the seed of a concept in international law, because it is because of his intervention, because of his warnings, that the Allied powers, France, Russia, and England at the time, jointly issued the May 24th, 1915 warning to the leaders of the Young Turk government, accusing them of crimes against humanity and civilization, and that they would hold them liable for those crimes. This was the first instance in international relations that such a statement had been drafted and publicly issued, and that concept over the course of the 20th century solidified and is now enshrined in international law. Again, granted that the Armenian people perhaps did not benefit from the activities of this of the Catholicos in preventing genocide, but I think as we look at the larger problem of genocide and its effect on humanity, then Catholicos Georg V is truly a man of world importance.
And when you said about world leaders, that extended including the President of the United States? He had,
Absolutely. There is correspondence in the National Archives preserved between the Catholicos, the Holy Father, and the President of the United States. And so he wasn't merely calling up and speaking to ambassadors. He was writing directly to the Chief Executive of the United States. And so President Wilson here in Washington was fully aware of what was happening to the Armenian people. And that goes far in explaining why he was sympathetic to the plight of the Armenians and why he encouraged the formation of what became known as the Near East Relief Organization and the issuance of a congressional resolution for the public to fundraise. This is a phenomenal development when you think back. Today there's a large Armenian American community. In those days there were just a handful of Armenian Americans. They could not have persuaded of their own capacity for the president to do something of the sort. And clearly I think the credit goes again to the Catholicos, Georg V Surenians, who really needs to be appreciated for the world-class leader that he was. So they were made aware of what was happening to the Armenian people, and this is how the headlines in the New York Times and other newspapers happened. It's thanks to Ambassador Morgenthau, and of course he wrote a remarkable account afterwards. But during the height of the crisis, before Ambassador Morgenthau is even engaged on this issue, it's the Catholicos who's already stepped forward and alerted the world.
Earlier you said that ETCHMIADZIN had turned into a refugee camp, and we can certainly imagine, well, beyond imagination, thousands of people being there. And you use the word overnight. How quickly did it have to go from church to refugee camp and accommodate the people?
Overnight is not an exaggeration. When the Russian army, the forces that had entered eastern Anatolia and had relieved the Armenian population in the city of Van, they did not stay there for more than a couple of months. And when they withdrew, the Armenian population of Van and the surrounding areas realized that they were now at the mercy of a genocidal regime, and that their only choice, which was no choice at all, was to flee. And so the 100,000 people who had been saved by defending themselves now suddenly were refugees. And within a matter of days, because they were close to the border and it was walking distance, you could cross it in 2-3 days' time. And so they did. And ETCHMIADZIN being reachable and very close to the border, then it was a very natural place to go as well. Distance played the time, but the emergency is really something that unfolded, as I say, within hours, within days. of the withdrawal of the Russian forces in midsummer 1915.
Part of your research goes into Van, goes into Varak, that area, and prominently the Armenian church leader Rouben Adalian is noticed there before, pre-Catholicos days. Can we talk a little bit about Van, the situation in Van, and what was happening? These were the refugees that were coming over.
This is, there were a number of instances where Armenian communities organized self-defense to protect themselves from the deportations and the massacres. All of those ultimately failed, except for these two rare instances. We know about Musadagh, and it was their just good fortune that they were located on the Mediterranean Sea and they could be rescued by ship. In the case of Van, because they were just close enough to the Russian border that they stood a chance to get out. But nevertheless, unlike the Musadagh Armenians, very many of the Vanetsi refugees actually perished either on the route there or after crossing the border. The Church of Varak, the Monastery of Varak, the School of Varak, stands in this exhibit as sort of symbolic of all the churches and monasteries and of the schools that the Armenian people had constructed over the centuries and the millennia in their homeland. But Varak had particular importance. One, for the Vanetsis, this was their holy pilgrimage site upon the mountain, which was visible. They could see it.
It was walking distance.
It's walking distance, and it was visible with eyesight, even though it's in a mountain beyond the city. But more significantly, Rouben had selected the site where to build the first modern Armenian school in historic Armenia. So even though he's famous as a patriarch and he's famous as a Catholicos, nevertheless, his popularity as the leader of the people who understood the country people of Armenia begins at this site. After the church itself, of the Holy Cross and the 7 churches of the monastery of Varak were famous for 1,000 years and more. Rouben Adalian loved this monastery so much that for the rest of his life, even though he was elevated through the ranks of the hierarchy of the Armenian Church, always retained and kept the title of the abbot, the prior of the monastery of Varagavank. And Varag, of course, being such a famous location, was targeted during the genocide, and its destruction stands as evidence of not simply the expulsion of the Armenian people, the so-called relocation of the Armenian people, but the literal ruination of the historic edifices of the Armenian people, so that their existence is not simply evacuated from historic Armenia, but their existence is erased from historic Armenia. And the photographs that have survived attest to that unfortunate result. These photographs that we discovered through archives and elsewhere testify to the horror of the siege. While there is a great deal of national mythology surrounding this event, it was an exceptional occurrence. But nevertheless, the photographs also attest to the fact that the city was, although liberated briefly, was in shambles and complete ruins. And the photographs that are in the exhibit are actually those of the American mission compound that was being run by Dr. Clarence Usher. And even though there was an American flag flying over this facility, that too was not spared because, again, many thousands of Armenians were taking refuge within the American compound in the hope that the American flag would protect them. But that made no difference to the Young Turk regime as they continued to shell the site and try to subdue the Armenian people.
Now, what's of interest to us is the place of the Armenian Church in all of this, particular interest to us by the nature of our show over here. So we have this Armenian Church traditionally known for its liturgies and a very traditional mainline, but now you're presenting it as really the hands-on church that accommodated, took care of, sheltered. And according to your exhibit, you're saying that what we traditionally think of genocide, 1915, 16, 17, really spilled over into the next decade as well. Can you talk a little bit about what was the situation of the church? Because here we had the independent state, communism came in at 20, so the whole country, everybody, you can't imagine it getting any worse, and it just gets worse and worse. Right.
It's It's the unbelievable aspect of what the Armenian genocide really was, that 1915 is merely the start of it. That year upon year upon year, the persecutions continue. The Young Turk regime did not let up in aspiring for the total eradication of the Armenian people, of the Armenian population. And when the Russian-Turkish border broke down in 1918, their armies did not stop at the frontier of the Ottoman Empire. They crossed over and pursued the Armenian population. And this exhibit ends, we're sort of skipping ahead, but it ends with images of the volunteer forces who came to those very walls where once the refugees came to seek refuge and organized the defense of Armenia. And once again, Catholicos Georg V Surenian played a critical role, because the military leaders, the Armenian military leaders, were very concerned that the Ottoman forces were so close to ETCHMIADZIN that his life was at risk. In fact, the site of the Battle of Sardarabad is a mere hour distance, even by a horse at that time. And so the risk was very, very real, and yet the Vehapar, the Catholicos, stood his ground and told the leaders that there is not a chance in the world that he would abandon his heritage, he would abandon the Armenian Church, and by so doing, he stiffened the resolve of the Armenian military leaders, and we know the result and the success of the Battle of Sardarabad and of the other battlefronts there. If he had fled, if he had not set an example, we might think of what the rest of the Armenian people might have thought and done under those circumstances. So he made a difference.
So there's a group of people that get together during this time, and it's really remarkable when you look at the slides. You've got Gomidas Vartabed, you've got Hovannes Tumanyan, and then emerges two other leaders. One is Karakin, who later became the Catholicos. So can you tell us a little bit about the people that were there?
You're quite right, and I appreciate your observation that there was a convergence, it would seem, of truly outstanding personalities at ETCHMIADZIN who became national church leaders in a subsequent generation. Karakin Hovsepians, who became Catholicos of the great House of Cilicia in succeeding decades, was at ETCHMIADZIN, and he was assigned by the Vehapar to be the head of the Fraternal Aid Committee that Surenians, Catholicos Surenians appointed him to be in charge of this. He was a younger man, naturally, to look after the refugees, and he spent nearly a year guiding that effort. And it was a risky effort because the diseases and the epidemics that were spreading all around, the risk of contagion and infection was very real. And it's just remarkable that they were able to at least save as much of the clergy, because his predecessor, who was an elderly bishop, indeed was a victim of contagion. And so it's remarkable that he accepted the job and continued. Many of the clergy at ETCHMIADZIN subsequently became national leaders. And of course, Khoren Muratbekyan was the immediate assistant to the Catholicos and began to provide all of the aid and support that he could extend to the Vehapar, as clearly under those circumstances he became more and more distressed. Eventually he emerged as his successor as Catholicos, but most unfortunately this man who did so much to help the Armenian refugees during the period of the Armenian genocide and World War I himself became a victim of the Stalinist purges.
Right. Some of the dark days in more recent Armenian history. In conclusion, we're going to put on, for our viewers, we'll have the website available, but I want to just talk about just generally now the Armenian Church today, the Armenian Church as a vehicle by which we can do some of this genocide prevention. We have this golden opportunity, it seems, that we have this history that points to an Armenian Church active, vibrant, doing some work in justice issues. this is a completely personal question. How do you see the Armenian Church today? Does it have a mission? Does it have something that it can do beyond our own self, or is it limited mostly to us? Especially if you've been to Armenia, you know that it's today, ETCHMIADZIN, the whole Armenian church structure is huge. Yeah.
Right. I think that's a very valuable question, and given that we have reached the centennial, it's time to reflect on that. Mm-hmm. And the evidence shows that the right person in the right place, a man of moral courage and religious inspiration, can stand up for more than his own people and speak on behalf of all of humanity. Mm-hmm. And it strikes me that the Armenian Church, with this valid heritage, not merely its religious mission, but now this tremendous humanitarian mission that it has undertaken and done so successfully, then can invoke that and speak on behalf of other peoples who are at risk, other peoples who are in danger, and become once again the instrument of issuing an early warning, especially when a Christian minority is at risk, or other minorities, irrespective of mm-hmm. their faith.
Absolutely.
Tyranny can be stopped. Its hand can be held if there is enough international outcry.
Mm-hmm. Just a small point that I found out from your exhibit is relatively small. The old April 24th date was institutionalized because of the church. Right. And so the church, because I've always thought we went along with the nation and okay, April 24th was the day they rounded up everybody, and so that's but it was the church that actually designated that as the day of remembrance. Yep. And it has become international today.
Right. Today, of course, even the President of the United States, April 24th, issues a Remembrance Day announcement. It's become even an American custom, but it all started with Patriarch Rouben Adalian of Constantinople, who won in 1919, the very first year of the post-war year, where they memorialized that day. But subsequently, he communicated officially with Catholicos Georg Surenians, asking that he acknowledge the popular desire of the Armenian people, of the survivors, that this day be officially recognized on the Armenian church calendar as the day for remembering the victims of the genocide. And Catholicos Surenians, of course, responded approvingly, and I've included that correspondence, the translation of that correspondence, as the final item in the exhibit. So April 24th is a day on the Armenian official church calender as well.
Official church calendar,
and not just the popular.
And it went over to the world. Right. Well, I want to thank you for this thing. Your next exhibit, you said it was about the Patriarch, and that's in the works, or it is.
Right.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
There is a follow-up exhibit to this one. It's called the First Deportation, which focuses on the fate of the Armenians of Zeytun again, because we've uncovered the imagery. And there, the Catholicos of the Great House of Cilicia played a critical role. Sahak Khabayan was the churchman there. And once again, the evidence is there that regardless of their location and regardless of all their predicament, these men really stood up and performed miracles under those most trying circumstances when the church was being so persecuted, and so many of the clergymen were obviously paying the ultimate price of martyrdom.
You know, and for our listeners, viewers, well, we have the website right on the screen. Dr. Adalian, I believe you were one of the first, if not the first one, to put this genocide, because I know from a long time ago, probably a little too far that I want to remember, your site was really the only authoritative information that we could get about the Armenian genocide. How long has it been up?
It's been up for more than 15 years, and I appreciate the acknowledgement.
Yeah, that's where we'd go whenever every April 24th to get the information. So please do check out that website and the entire exhibit. And I thank you for putting it online, because so often this stuff gets put into places that are inaccessible. It is accessible. So if I could impress upon our viewers, not only go there, but share that link, share it with people, take a look at it. Dr. Adalian, we wish you all the best. I can't thank you enough for coming out, bringing the exhibit here to the Western Diocese. On behalf of our primate, Archbishop Rouben Adalian, I thank you, and we wish you all the best in all of your endeavors.
Thank you, and thank you for honoring me with the time.
Thank you.